What happens when you recover from burnout, but you don't know who you are anymore and the crisis is over? You're starting to sleep better. Your nervous system is starting to settle. Your doctor even gave you the okay to return back to work. But instead of feeling excited about getting back to life, a part of you is starting to feel a bit afraid of what you're about to walk into. The thought of returning back to work is making your body tense. You're not even motivated by the same goals that you once were. And it's starting to feel a bit weird. You're realizing that the goals that once motivated you aren't the same this time around because you recovered. And now you're trying to figure out what is going to get me back to that person anymore, or who am I without those goals? You start realizing that the version of you who can handle everything is no longer available. But now you have to learn how to reintroduce yourself to the new version of you that's supposed to replace her. You keep asking yourself, why can't I get back to normal? Why am I afraid to start again? Have I lost my ambition? Did burnout permanently change who I was? And if I'm not the strong, productive, successful woman like before, who am I? That is the part of burnout recovery that nobody really prepares you for. We talk about recognizing burnout and even surviving burnout. You've gotten your rest. You've taken your leave of absence. You started setting boundaries, getting help, and reducing your stress load. But we really don't spend enough time focusing on the identity shift and the change that comes after the crisis has ended. What happens when the emergency is over and you're no longer operating in that fight or flight mode? Because when your entire sense of self was built around achievement and achievement contributed to your collapse, you're really left with the difficult question of, what's left of me when I can no longer live the way I used to? And that is what we're talking about today. Welcome back to the Self-Care CEO podcast with Courtney, where we have honest conversations about burnout, boundaries, emotional wellness, and really how to operate and function with capacity instead of hustle. Today's conversation is for the woman who's technically recovered, but doesn't feel ready to return to her former life. It's for the woman rebuilding after everything fell apart, the woman who appeared too successful, responsible, intelligent, or accomplished for anyone to recognize that she was crumbling on the inside. And it's especially for the woman who is beginning to realize that she really doesn't want her old life back, but has no idea what she wants instead of that. I want to begin with an important distinction. Recovering from burnout doesn't necessarily mean returning to your former self or the previous version of what you knew. Because we say we want to get back to who we were. We want the old energy back. We want to feel motivated the way we used to. And I just want to be back to normal, right? But what if normal was the problem? What if the version of you that you are trying so desperately to recover was overextended, anxious, performing, disconnected from her own needs, and surviving on adrenaline? What if she was productive but not peaceful? Successful but not emotionally safe? What if everybody could depend on her, but she had no one who she could depend on and go to? What if she mastered functioning so well that she learned how not to feel and know her own needs? You may be trying to return to a version of yourself your body can no longer afford to be. That does not mean you're broken. It just means you have to create a new definition of recovery for yourself. Now, recovery may not mean getting back to the old version of yourself. Recovery this time around may be about discovering who you are now that survival is no longer the catalyst that's pushing you to get things done, and that you allow to be your primary identity. For many high achieving women, achievement is not simply something to do. It really has become who they are. They're the responsible one, the smart one, the dependable one, the strong one, the one who always figures it out, and many times seems to be the one to always have the right answers. You keep your family together, you meet the deadline, you get the promotion, you work well under pressure, you continue to perform even when your personal life is really crumbling and falling apart. And because you perform so well, no one really questions or recognizes how you really feel on the inside. And people also don't recognize the cost that comes with the performance of appearing to be well when you're not. That includes the people that are closest to us. And sometimes it includes you. When you've been rewarded for your ability to function, it's difficult to recognize when your overfunctioning is now harming who you are as a person. You call it commitment. You may even call it discipline. Being a good mom, a good wife, a good employee, business owner, even a good Christian. But underneath all of that responsibility is a woman who is terrified of disappointing people. There may be a woman who does not feel valuable unless she's being useful, and a woman who's confused being needed with being loved. There may be a woman who does not know how to rest unless her body physically forces her to stop. That is why burnout can create such a identity disruption, because it doesn't only take away your energy, it takes away the primary way you learn to experience what your worth was really. If I'm not producing, am I still valuable? And if I'm not helping, am I still needed? If I stop carrying everyone, will people still choose me? Rather yet, will they even see me? And if I'm no longer exceptional, will I become invisible? If I can't perform at the level I used to, am I still myself? Those are questions that typically hide underneath the pressure to get back to normal and a sense of normalcy. The woman may say that she misses working, but she may also miss the validation that work provided. She may say she misses being productive, but she really misses the sense of control productivity gave her. She may say she wants her drive back, but she may be afraid that without her accomplishments, there's nothing valuable or even interesting about her. And that is not really a time management issue. That's identity work that needs to be done. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with struggling while still being able to perform. You're exhausted, but you still get the work done. You're anxious, but you're still leading the meetings and the conference calls. You're overwhelmed, but you still remember everybody's birthday. You're mentally scattered, but you have built systems to keep you organized. You're falling apart internally, but externally, your life still looks quite impressive to people watching. This is the one reason that high-functioning women can go years without recognizing conditions like anxiety, depression, trauma response, or even ADHD. The question I hear people ask often is how can anything be wrong? Look at everything you accomplished. But accomplishment does not tell how much something cost you. It does not tell how many hours you spent trying to complete a task that appeared effortless to everybody else. It doesn't tell how much anxiety you use to keep yourself organized. And it doesn't show the procrastination, panic, shame, perfectionism, over preparation, emotional crashes, or exhaustion happening behind the scene. It only shows the result that was achieved. Sometimes high achievement does not mean there was a struggle. Sometimes high achievement was the strategy used to compensate for the struggle. You learned to work twice as hard. You created systems. You became a perfectionist. You waited until panic created the adrenaline that it took to get the task done. You overprepared because you didn't trust yourself. You refused to ask for help because you didn't want to seem incapable of doing the work. Then eventually your system stopped working. The adrenaline could no longer carry you. Your body stopped cooperating. Your focus declined. Your memory changed. Your motivation disappeared. And suddenly, you could no longer compensate for what had been happening underneath the surface this entire time. This is when a lot of high functioning women ask, is something wrong with me? But the better question is really, what have I been carrying and concealing through a sense of achievement? Your accomplishments are real, even your intelligence and your work ethic. But your successes don't cancel out the struggle that comes with it. You are allowed to be accomplished and still need and ask for help. You are allowed to be intelligent and have ADHD. You are allowed to be responsible and experience anxiety. You are allowed to be a leader and still reach your capacity. You do not have to fall apart publicly before struggle seems like a legitimate reason for you to stop. So let's talk about the woman who has been medically cleared to return to work, but feels terrified by the thought of going back. On paper, she appears to be ready. She's rested, completed treatment. Her symptoms even improve, and her leave is coming to an end, and her doctor even signed the paperwork. But her body is saying, oh, I can't go back there. And that creates a sense of fear and shame around work. Because then you start thinking, well, if my doctor says I'm ready, then why don't I feel ready? What if I go back and fall apart again? What if everybody expects the old version of me? What if I can no longer perform at the level that I'm used to? What if burnout happens again? Being medically clear and feeling emotionally safe are really not the same thing. Medical clearance indicates that you're stable enough to resume former activities, but it doesn't automatically mean that you're at the point to where you can trust yourself again. It does not mean that the environment that contributed to your burnout has even changed. It doesn't mean that your workload has become manageable. It doesn't mean that you've learned how to identify your limits before exceeding them. And it doesn't mean you're ready to return in exactly the same way you left. Your fear may not mean that you're incapable of working. It just means that your body is remembering the work that's been required from you when you go back in the same environment as before. Because we got to remember, our body keeps the score. And even though we're past a certain point in our recovery process, our body is a memory box. Our brain remembers, our nervous system remembers, everything remembers until we start to change the effect of former memories so we can create new memories. If work meant constant urgency, impossible expectations, emotional suppression, perfectionism, conflict, overperformance, or abandoning your needs, then your nervous system may interpret returning to work like you're returning back to danger. And so that fear, that fight or flight will definitely kick in, and that anxiety starts to increase. That fear needs to more so be understood and not immediately judged as something bad. So I would recommend asking yourself, am I afraid of work itself, or am I afraid of working the way that I used to? Am I afraid of responsibility, or am I afraid that responsibility will consume me all over again? Am I afraid that I can't do the job, or that I won't be allowed to have limits while doing the job? Those are different fears, and they require different responses. You may not need to prove that you can immediately resume everything. You may need a gradual re-entry, like pace yourself. Slow and steady wins the race. You may ask your employer for accommodations, or even make self-accommodations for yourself. Change how your daily schedule looks and create clearer expectations for yourself. You may need to even start practicing taking breaks before you're depleted. Include time blocks for breaks throughout your day, even as short as 15-minute increments. You may need to stop volunteering for responsibilities that do not belong to you, and let go of the good and letting go of what good enough is to be good enough. You may need to learn how to leave work at work. And most importantly, you need evidence that you can participate in your life without disappearing inside of it. The goal isn't simply to return to work. It's to return to yourself while you are working. Now remember, burnout recovery does contain grief. You grieve lost time. You grieve missed opportunities. You can grieve relationships affected by your exhaustion. And you're grieving the health consequences that happen as a result of you pushing yourself too far. But you're grieving the person that really seems so capable of handling everything that's no longer or ready to be that person anymore. Even if she was overwhelmed, she got things done. Even if she was anxious, she was productive. Even if she was exhausted, she seemed reliable. She was struggling, but other people respected her so-called strength. You may miss her, and that's okay. You may look at your current capacity and be disappointed. Tasks that were once simple may now feel heavy. Your tolerance for chaos, you have to realize, has decreased. You need more recovery time. You can't multitask the way you once did. You notice emotional and physical warning signs sooner, and a part of you may interpret those changes as weakness. But what if that isn't weakness? What if it's self-awareness? And it's not what if. It is more self-awareness. And you are just more in tune with yourself. Now, keeping in mind that you probably had warning signs before your last collapse and your last breakdown. You just chose to ignore it. And you did not feel that you owed yourself permission to pay attention to those moments and pay attention to those warning signs. Back then, you called exhaustion laziness. You called anxiety ambition. You called hypervigilance preparation. You even called self-neglect sacrifice and over-functioning love. You call having no boundaries dependable. And the fact that you recognize your limits now doesn't mean the limits are new. It means you stopped overriding them and dismissing them as invalid in the first place. You can still grieve the former version of yourself without trying to resurrect every pattern that version of you used to survive. You can appreciate her, even respect her, and thank her for getting you through the seasons you did and the seasons that you did not know how to navigate any other way. But you can give her permission now and tell her that she doesn't have to run that part of your life anymore. You don't need to live in a permanent state of emergency anymore. You don't have to prove your strength by continuously exceeding your capacity. You are allowed to become someone you never had the safety or support to be. That isn't rejecting your old self. That's allowing her to rest too. And doesn't that feel good? I know it sounds refreshing to me. Now, when your career changes, your relationship ends, your health interrupts your plans, or your old goals no longer fit, it can feel as though you're starting over. This can be especially difficult when you believed you would be farther along by now. Maybe you, at 25, you imagine what 25 looked like versus 35, and you just knew you would be at a certain place at 25 versus age 35 versus age 45. But age isn't really the issue. The issue really comes from comparing yourself to a version that you created that was unrealistic to begin with. You thought you would be more established. You thought the relationship would last. You thought the career would be more fulfilling. You thought the business would be further along. You thought you would have more money, more clarity, more energy, or more certainty. Now you're standing in the remains of a life that no longer works, asking whether it's too late to begin over again. But rebuilding is not the same as starting from nothing. You are not beginning without experience. You aren't beginning without wisdom. And you definitely aren't beginning without evidence of what you can survive. You are beginning with information your former self did not have. You know what it costs to abandon yourself. You know what your body feels like when you're approaching capacity. You know which relationship only worked when you had no boundaries. You know what kind of success you no longer want. You now know what you're capable of. But you're beginning to understand what should not be required of you in the process. And that is not nothing. Sometimes the life that fell apart was built by a version of you that had not learned to include herself in her own decisions. Now rebuilding gives you the opportunity to create a life that finally includes you. Not only your abilities or responsibilities, or just your goals, you. It includes your health, your peace, your values, your relationships, your limitations, your joy, and your actual capacity. You aren't rebuilding because you failed at life. You're rebuilding because you finally stopped agreeing to a life that required your constant disappearance. Now, one of the most disorienting parts of healing is discovering how many relationships or responsibilities were organized or function around your overfunctioning. When you stop doing everything, people start to notice. When you stop anticipating everybody's needs, now people call you inconsiderate. When you stop rescuing, people may accuse you of changing. When you begin saying no, people who benefited from your lack of boundaries now may describe you as mean or even selfish. When you stop being available all the time, some people don't feel like they can relate to you anymore. This can create another identity crisis, because if you're not the fixer, who are you? If you're not the caretaker, what's your role now? If you're no longer willing to be the strongest person in every room, will anybody show up for you? Some women discover that they don't need to know how to participate in relationships unless they're needed. They know how to help, they know how to advise, they know how to provide, they know how to organize, and even carry everything, but they don't know how to simply be known. Being needed can feel safer than being known because being needed gives you a clear function. If you're useful, you have a reason for people to keep you. But being known requires some vulnerability. It requires you to be present even when you have nothing to offer. It requires you to believe that your presence has value apart from your performance. And that's some hard identity work. You may need to practice allowing other people to help you. You may need to tolerate the discomfort of not immediately solving other people's problems. You may need to let someone be disappointed without rushing to change your decision. And you may need to enter spaces where you are not the expert or the fixer. You need to develop interests outside of producing income, ideas, recognition, or even outcomes. You may need to remember that you are a whole person, not a collection of services that you provide to other people. Here is something else that can happen after burnout. The goals you work so hard to reach may not feel as meaningful, and that can be frightening. You sacrifice for those goals. You built your entire life around them. People identify you with those goals, and you may have invested education, money, labor, and even energy into becoming that version of yourself. Now you're wondering, what is it that you still want? This can produce some shame because you think, after I invested all of that out of myself, who am I? Like, can I still change my mind after I invested so much time, energy, and money into the last thing that I thought was who I was supposed to be? But a gentle reminder is healing changes perspective. As you become healthier, the dreams you created from fear, scarcity, insecurity, or the need for approval may stop fitting the new version of yourself. That doesn't mean those years were wasted. It means you just have new information to add into your memory box. Sometimes we choose goals because we genuinely want them. And sometimes we choose goals because we want what we believe the goal will prove. We want the title because it proves we're intelligent. We want the incomes because it proves that we're successful. And we want the relationship because it proves that we are lovable. We want the recognition because it proves we matters. But when you begin believing in your worth without requiring external proof, some of the goals that you had before loses its emotional power. And you are allowed to reevaluate them. You are allowed to say, that goal may have served the former version of me, but it no longer represents the life that I want for myself. You are allowed to keep the dream and change the way you pursue it. You are allowed to even reduce the scale. You are allowed to take longer. You are allowed to build support around it. You are allowed to choose a different dream entirely. Changing direction doesn't mean you quit. Sometimes changing direction is evidence that you're finally listening to yourself. Now, this is where women get stuck. They know they can't remain still forever, but you become afraid that movement will get you back into over-functioning like you used to. You are afraid that one new commitment will become 10, and you are afraid that ambition will take over again. Those kind of women don't trust themselves to recognize when enough is enough. And they wonder how Can they begin again? First, the first thing is stop using your previous capacity as the standard. You don't have to return at full speed. You don't have to approve your recovery by immediately jumping back into everything you did before. Begin with your current capacity, not your past performance. Second, separate your consistency from intensity. Your old pattern may have been to do too much, too quickly, and then collapse. Healthy rebuilding may look less impressive in the beginning. It may mean working for a shorter period and stopping while you still have energy. It may mean committing to one goal instead of 5. It may mean leaving white space on your calendar. It may even mean allowing progress to feel ordinary, because you aren't trying to recreate another burst of performance. You're trying to create a pace that you can now live with. Third, create limits before you need them. Don't wait until you're exhausted before you decide when you're going to stop. Determine it in advance. How many hours are you willing to work in a day, maybe even a week? How many clients or customers can you responsibly serve? How many social commitments can you manage? And if you want to manage commitments, maybe you want to pull it back to, instead of going out every day this weekend, I'm only giving people one day out of the weekend. The other day belongs to me. Determine which days are going to be protected. What responsibilities are you no longer available to carry? What warning signs mean you need to slow down? Because in this phase, boundaries are so much harder to create once your nervous system is already overwhelmed. So you have to be more proactive than reactive, for sure. The fourth thing is to build your support inside of your new plan. If your new life can only function when you're operating at 100%, your plan is too fragile, because human beings get sick. That includes you and your children. Your children, if you have any, may need attention. Emergencies happen. Your energy changes. Grief arrives. Life interrupts like it normally would. And a sustainable life really needs margin. It also needs people, systems, and resources that do not require you to be the only point of stability. The fifth thing is to practice stopping without finishing everything. This may be one of the hardest skills that you will have to learn this go round. There will always be something else you could do, another email, another task, another idea, another person to help. If you only allow yourself to stop once everything is complete, you won't ever stop, because the goal line continues to be moved. Your rest this time around cannot depend solely on completion. Sometimes you have to stop because you've reached the amount of energy you decided to spend on today. The work can remain unfinished without you being a failure. You have to remember that. So let's recap the 5 steps that you need to begin again without burning out. The first one, stop using your previous capacity as the standard. Second, separate consistency from intensity. Third, create limits before you need them. Fourth, build support into the plan. And 5, practice stopping without finishing everything first. I want to offer 5 questions for you to consider as we rebuild your new identity after burnout. Now, don't rush through these questions. You may want to even journal them. So I really hope you have your pen and paper nearby. And process it later. Make notes, do whatever you have to do. But consider them nonetheless. Question number 1. Who was I required to be in order to feel safe, successful, accepted, or loved? Maybe you became the strong one, the quiet one, the exceptional one, the caretaker, achiever, problem solver, the woman who never needed anything. That identity helped you survive something. Acknowledge what it did for you. Question number 2. Which parts of that identity are authentic and which parts were protected? Your strength may be authentic, and even your leadership. Your intelligence, ambition, generosity, and desire to help may all be authentic, but believing you can never ask for help may be protective. Believing you must always be useful may be protective. Believing rest has to be earned is definitely protective. You don't have to discard everything about yourself. You are just learning to distinguish your actual character from adaptations that you develop in order to survive. Question number 3. What do I value when nobody is watching? What matters when there is no applause? What kind of life feels meaningful, even if it doesn't impress anyone? Who do I want to be inside my home? How do I want to feel in my body? What do you want your closest relationships to experience from you? How do you want to relate to your faith, your time, your money, and your work? This is important because your values will start to guide you while your goals can still remain unclear. Question number 4. What am I no longer willing to sacrifice for success? And be specific. Maybe you're no longer willing to sacrifice sleep or your physical health, even your peace, your relationship with your children, your integrity, your ability to be emotionally present, your spiritual life, your recovery. You need to know what success is no longer allowed to cost you. Question number 5. What would it look like to build a life I do not constantly need to escape from? Not a perfect life, not a life without responsibility, stress, or discomfort. A life in which your values, capacity, relationships, and responsibilities are in better alignment. A life where rest is part of the structure, not an emergency response to collapse. A life where you are allowed to change your mind, where you can ask for help before you're drowning, and a life where your accomplishments adds to your identity but doesn't consume it. A life where you get to exist even when you are not producing. If you recover from burnout and now feel confused, afraid, unmotivated, or disconnected from your former identity, I want you to really understand the uncertainty of this new version of yourself does not mean you fail. The more current question is, who are you now in this moment, in this new phase of your life? And that is evidence that healing is working. You are questioning identities you once accepted without examination. You are recognizing what your former life cost you. You are becoming aware of the difference between who you are and what you learned to do in order to survive. You may not be able to return to the old version of yourself, but returning was never the goal anyway. Maybe your new goal is integration. Keep the wisdom, the strength, the ambition, and the evidence that you can survive difficult things. But release the belief that suffering is the price of being successful, because it's not. Release the belief that being needed is the same as being loved. Release the belief that your body is an inconvenience. Release the belief that every season requires the same capacity. Release the belief that you must remain who you have always been simply because it made other people comfortable. You are really not starting over from nothing. You are starting again with more awareness, with more boundaries, and with the ability to now understand what is really costing too much. And you're starting again with permission to include yourself in the life that you are building. There may be moments when you miss the old version of yourself, and even when you question your new pace that you created. And that's okay. There may be moments when you watch someone else move faster and wonder whether you're becoming too cautious or even moving too slow yourself. But speed isn't the only evidence of progress. Sometimes progress looks like noticing that you are overwhelmed before you break down. Sometimes it looks like asking for help, choosing one priority, and disappointing someone without abandoning your boundary or feeling guilty as a result. Sometimes it looks like working hard and resting before your body forces you to. Sometimes it looks like admitting that a dream no longer belongs to you and that it's okay to pivot and it's never too late. Sometimes progress looks like becoming a person you've never seen before. A woman who is ambitious but not self-abandoning, responsible but not responsible for everybody, generous but not depleted, strong but still supported, successful but still present in her own life. You recover from burnout. Now, who are you supposed to be? You are not supposed to become another version of yourself designed around everyone else's desires or expectations of you. This is your opportunity to become someone whose life has enough room for herself too. And if you know a high-achieving woman who is struggling to understand why she can't simply go back to the person she was before, share this episode with her. She may need the reminder that she has not failed at recovery either. She may simply be meeting herself outside of survival for the first time. So subscribe for more conversations about burnout, boundaries, identity, and learning to live and lead with capacity instead of hustle. And remember, you don't have to rebuild the same life that broke you. You are allowed to become someone new. Until next time, see y'all later. Bye.